What happens when a rising power finally achieves the goal it has pursued for generations? In 1453, the Ottomans captured Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire and announcing themselves to the world. But the fall of the city was not the end of the story. In many ways, it was only the beginning. Over the next century, Ottoman armies would march across the Balkans, challenge the rulers of Persia, conquer the lands of the Mamluks, threaten the heart of Central Europe, and dominate much of the Eastern Mediterranean. This is the story of how the Ottoman Empire rose from the conquerors of Constantinople to become one of the dominant powers of the 16th century.
This is the History of the World podcast. Written and presented by Chris Hasler.
So good, so good, so good.
New markdowns up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Stock up and save big on shoes, tops, dresses, accessories, and more must-haves for summer. Join the Nordy Club to unlock exclusive discounts, shop new arrivals first, and more. Plus, buy online and pick up at your favorite Rack store for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
Hey, I just Venmo'd you for rent.
Nice. Now I can instantly spend it whether I'm checking out online with Venmo or using a Venmo debit card.
Say more.
More exactly. Because the more you do with Venmo, the more you get. Like earning up to 5% cash back with Venmo Stash on a bundle of brands.
So, order more pizza.
The math demands it.
Get the Venmo debit card.
Venmo Stash bundle terms and exclusions apply. See terms at venmo.me/stash terms. Venmo checkout not available at all merchants. Venmo MasterCard is issued by the Bancorp Bank N.A.
Volume 5, The Expansionist World. Episode 1, The Ottoman Empire, Part 1. (1453) marked one of the great turning points of world history. After weeks of relentless bombardment, assault and attrition, the armies of Sultan Mehmed II finally breached the ancient land walls of Constantinople, the last stronghold of the Byzantine Empire and a city that had endured for more than 1,000 years. Its fall ended the Roman imperial tradition in the east and reshaped the balance of power across the Mediterranean. For the Ottomans, it was the moment in which a regional dynasty became an imperial force. For Europe, it signalled the advance of a formidable new power along its eastern frontier. We covered the fall of Constantinople in Volume 4. Let us also dispel a myth about the name of the city changing to Istanbul in 1453. Many sources state this as fact, but the reality is more complicated. The name Istanbul was already in use long before the Ottoman conquest, deriving from a Greek colloquial expression used by people travelling to the city. In practice, both Constantinople and Istanbul were used for centuries. The Ottoman state itself continued to use forms of Constantinople in official documents, while Istanbul remained the common vernacular name. It was not until 1930 that the Turkish Republic formally standardised Istanbul as the city's official international name. The Ottoman ruler was Mehmed II, at the time the 21-year-old Sultan. Already the Ottoman Sultan of the European city of Edirne, previously Adrianople. Upon the conquest, he adopted the title Caesar of the Romans, hoping to legitimise his rule as the successor to the Roman emperors in the eyes of both Muslims and Christians. Pope Nicholas V was extremely troubled by the loss of Constantinople, one of Christendom's greatest cities and the historic capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Across much of Latin Christendom, a crusading mentality still lingered. Many Christians regarded the Ottoman advance as an aggressive challenge to their faith and viewed Muslim powers of the Eastern Mediterranean, often referred to as Saracens, through much the same lens as the Crusaders of earlier centuries. The Ottomans were clever enough to learn from the past. When the Latins conquered Constantinople after the Fourth Crusade at the beginning of the 13th century, the Byzantines dispersed into remote areas of the Byzantine Empire, regrouped and retook Constantinople later in the century. This time, the Ottomans were much wealthier and powerful and realised that they would need to conquer the outlying lands of the Byzantine Empire if they were to prevent a backlash from angry, displaced Byzantines. By the year 1461, Mehmed II had squashed the remaining pockets of Byzantine rule, such as Trebizond, and had already started the construction of Topkapi Palace, the centre of Ottoman administration and the home of the Ottoman sultans for centuries to come. The palace still exists today as a museum and library. The Ottomans realised that it wouldn't just be enough to squash Byzantine resistance, but also they would need to be considerate of neighbouring Christian resistance to Islamic expansion. It wasn't the case that the Ottomans were intolerant of Christians, as they had no issue with entertaining Christian merchants travelling through their lands to trade with the Levant and India. In fact, Christian merchants were granted commercial privileges to encourage trade and revenue. However, the Christian traders of Genoa and Venice often demonstrated resentment of this Ottoman control of the route and were only too happy to oppose this Saracen presence in traditionally Christian realms. The Bosnian king, Stephen Tomasevic, withheld tribute from the Ottomans, believing that he would receive backup from the papacy and the Hungarians in the event of an Ottoman backlash. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II was not about to let this disrespect go unpunished. He certainly needed to send a message to any other Christian realm considering opposing him. Mehmed led a large army into Bosnia, and the disunity of the Bosnians caused panic among the people, and many Bosnian strongholds surrendered quickly. With no unity or support, Stephen's Bosnian kingdom was no match for the Ottomans. When Stephen was captured by the Ottomans, he was spared no mercy and was executed, bringing to an end the Bosnian royal line and turning Bosnia into an Ottoman province. This strengthened the Ottoman western frontier and gave the empire greater strategic depth against future incursions from Hungary and other Christian powers. The conquest of Bosnia by the Ottomans enabled Islam to grow in these lands, so much so that the legacy of Islam remains visible in Bosnia through the Bosniak ethnic group, which makes up around half of the country's modern population. On their eastern frontier, the lands of Persia and beyond had been contested over since the weakening of the Timurid Empire, an empire founded by Tamerlane, a warlord who claimed descent from the great Mongol ruler Genghis Khan. In the aftermath of Tamerlane's death at the beginning of the 15th century, the lands of the Timurids became vulnerable. 15th century Persia was contested over by two particular Turkoman tribal confederations called the Black Sheep Turkomans and the White Sheep Turkomans, locally referred to as the Kara Koyunlu and the Ak Koyunlu respectively. Kara Koyunlu's greatest ruler was Kara Yusuf, a man who had had to fight against the ambitious aggression of Tamerlane until Tamerlane's death in 1405. After Tamerlane's death, Kara Yusuf would use his charisma and military skill to create a strong confederation which was able to take control of major cities in the region of Persia, such as Baghdad, Mosul, and Tabriz. Kara Koyunlu was never fully organised as a state, which left it vulnerable without a strong ruler, due to internal rivalries and struggles for succession. These weaknesses were exploited by Uzun Hasan, ruler of Ak Koyunlu, who oversaw the white sheep Turkomans becoming the dominant power in Persia. And this leads us into the period of history where the Ottomans were causing nervous tension for Europeans. So much so that the Venetians sought an alliance with Ak Koyunlu in order to tip the balance away from the Ottomans. Understanding that he could be facing aggression simultaneously from both the east and the west, Mehmed took the initiative and marched an army east into the lands of Ak Koyunlu. Mehmed's Ottoman army was modern and well organised with janissaries and advanced gunpowder artillery. The janissaries were originally Christian boys taken from the Balkans, converted to Islam, and trained to be soldiers. They are often regarded as one of the first permanent standing armies in Europe, being salaried, disciplined, and directly loyal to the Sultan. Early janissaries were forbidden to marry in order to ensure their loyalty to the Sultan, who was their direct commander. This particular process of creating janissaries was called the devshirme system. In 1473, the Ottoman army led by Sultan Mehmed II faced the Ak Koyunlu Confederation led by Uzun Hasan at the Battle of Otlukbeli. The outcome was a crushing victory for the Ottomans. Uzun Hasan's army was decisively defeated, and the power of Ak Koyunlu was significantly weakened, setting the stage for the eventual rise of the Safavids, a future rival of the Ottomans from the 16th century. To the north of Anatolia is the Black Sea. The lands to its north had been conquered by the Mongols in the 13th century, and the Mongol successor state that emerged from the conquest became known as the Golden Horde. The thalassocratic rival of the Venetians were the Genoese. By thalassocratic, we refer specifically to a naval empire. In the age of the Latin Empire, the Genoese were rewarded for their loyalty to the restored Byzantines by being allowed to trade rights and territory in the Black Sea, such as the Silk Road trading colony of Kaffa, modern Feodosia, in Crimea. If you recall, the trade activity flowing through Kaffa is believed to be responsible for the transference of the Black Death from Asia to Europe. Tamerlane's attacks on the Golden Horde in the late 14th century weakened their power, and local Turkic populations and nobility in Crimea grew increasingly dissatisfied with the leadership of the Horde. This resulted in the breakaway of the Crimean Khanate in 1441. This meant that the Genoese colonies became more vulnerable, as a more localised governance meant more focus on their presence, especially now that the Byzantine Empire was about to be run out of existence. Kaffa was surrounded by potential enemies. Mehmed saw a lucrative opportunity to bring the Genoese trade port of Kaffa into the Ottoman sphere of influence. Mehmed launched a naval expedition against the Genoese colonies of the Black Sea and Crimea in 1475, and they all fell in quick succession with no support, particularly from the Crimean Khanate, who had little choice but to support the powerful Ottomans or risk their own political existence. With the Genoese colonies now under Ottoman control, the Crimean Khanate was also reduced to a vassal state of the Ottomans, giving the Ottomans another valuable buffer state between themselves and the Kingdom of Poland, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and the emerging Russian principalities. The Ottomans now had a rich source of trade revenue under their control. The Black Sea effectively became an Ottoman lake. Mehmed II's reign saw the Ottomans transform from a regional power into a true empire. Mehmed was born in Edirne, and the environment around him was one of hostility and a crusader mentality against the ambitions of the Ottomans. Mehmed was trained throughout his childhood to become sultan, and had briefly occupied the throne before succeeding his father permanently in 1451, still only 19 years old. Almost immediately, Mehmed began planning the conquest of Constantinople, which he did with incredible efficiency. Despite experiencing defeat in Belgrade, Mehmed consolidated his rule of the Byzantine realms and ultimately overcame the resistance of Vlad the Impaler during the Wallachian campaign before expanding his territory into Bosnia in 1463 and Albania in 1478, which he achieved after the death of the celebrated Albanian military leader Skanderbeg. Mehmed commissioned the construction of Topkapi Palace and Fatih Mosque, alongside the modernisation of the city of Constantinople. Mehmed eventually died during a military campaign in 1481. Selim I. The reign of Mehmed II's son, Bayezid II, was a period of relative stability, although there was a degree of factionalism within the empire, with tensions between Bayezid's sons over the succession. The ambitions of the son called Selim were notable. He would raise support among the Janissaries, who themselves were becoming more influential in Ottoman politics. In 1512, Selim forced his father to abdicate by marching on Constantinople with his supporting Janissaries. Bayezid knew that standing against his son would only cause strife and didn't have the strength or authority to oppose him. So he abdicated, retired to Bursa, and died shortly afterwards. You can decide for yourself whether this sounds suspicious, but there is no evidence of foul play. Selim eliminated his rivals, which included brothers and nephews, through execution or exile. His reputation was built on this ruthlessness, and he would earn the epithet Yavuz, translated to mean stern or resolute. As we mentioned before, the Turkoman Confederation of Akkuyunlu was weakened by a defeat inflicted by Selim's grandfather, and this paved the way for a Sufi brotherhood from Iranian Azerbaijan called the Safaviya order to gain power. They converted to Shia Islam and transformed from a spiritual movement to a political and military force. In 1501, the Safavids established a powerful new state, and their leader, Shah Ismail I, was proclaimed the Shah of Iran. The Safavid dynasty established Twelver Shi'ism as their state religion, in contrast to the Sunni Islamic identity of the Ottoman Empire. When Selim came to power as the Ottoman Sultan, he viewed the Safavids as a threat and launched a campaign against them. The two forces clashed in 1514 at the Battle of Chaldiran. The swift cavalry charges and the keen devotion of the Shah's own Qizilbash warriors were not a match for the firearms and the discipline of the Sultan's Janissaries. The Ottomans defeated the Safavids and went on to temporarily capture the Safavid capital city of Tabriz. The victory proved to be a vital indication that the Ottomans had the superior force of the two imperial movements, and enabled the Ottomans to keep the Safavid threat at bay. Back in the 13th century, slave soldiers within Ayyubid Egypt took political control of the realm and established a Mamluk Sultanate, with Mamluk being the word used for the slave soldier status, and becoming the word used in reference to the Sultanate itself. By the beginning of the 16th century, the Mamluks ruled over Egypt, Syria and Palestine, and controlled the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. This would represent an attractive next prospect for Selim, looking to consolidate, demonstrate and validate his power as the most powerful ruler in Dar al-Islam, not only by taking the lands of the holy cities, but by controlling the important naval trade routes of the Red Sea. By the early 16th century, the power of the Mamluks was weakening due to internal strife and economic decline. The Mamluks had to rely on traditional heavily armoured cavalry, while the Ottoman army had their gunpowder weaponry that had served them well previously. The Ottoman infantry were using matchlock weapons such as the handheld arquebus or the longer-barrelled musket. In 1516, the Ottomans battled with the Mamluks in the lands of Syria and were successful, killing the Mamluk Sultan Al-Ashraf Kanza al-Ghori in the process. The Ottomans quickly occupied Syria and Palestine, planning to move onward to the Mamluk heartlands in Egypt. Despite the new Mamluk Sultan Suleiman II attempting to utilise firearms, the following year the Mamluks were defeated again, with the new Mamluk Sultan being captured and eventually hanged. All of the lands of the Mamluk state fell into Ottoman hands, and the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt ceased to exist. This included Hijaz, the location of the sacred cities of Medina and Mecca. Cairo, under the Mamluks, had become the home of the Abbasid Caliph since the fall of the Caliph's traditional home in Baghdad to the Mongols in the middle of the 13th century. When Cairo fell to the Ottomans in 1517, the last Abbasid Caliph resident in Egypt was taken to Constantinople. Later Ottoman tradition claimed that he formally transferred the title of Caliph to Selim, although modern historians debate whether such a ceremony ever occurred. Regardless of the precise circumstances, the Ottoman sultans gradually came to be recognised as the leading caliphs of the Sunni Muslim world. The title would remain associated with the Ottoman dynasty until its abolition by the Turkish Republic in 1924. The fact that the Ottomans had obtained control of Cairo, Jerusalem, Mecca and Medina meant that they could credibly claim leadership of much of the Sunni Muslim world. This would remain true until their fall in the early 20th century. Suleiman the Magnificent. In 1520, Selim I died at the age of 49 after being overcome by illness while planning a campaign westwards. He would be succeeded by his son Suleiman without any serious dynastic opposition. Suleiman's great-grandfather, Mehmed II, had failed to capture the Hungarian city of Belgrade during his reign and shortly after the fall of Constantinople. Suleiman made the city one of his early targets, realising that the Hungarian state had been weakened by internal divisions. So in 1521, Ottoman forces besieged the city of Belgrade. Tens of thousands of Ottomans stood against a Hungarian garrison numbering only a few thousand defenders. The two rivers entering Belgrade, the Danube and the Sava, were blockaded. The fortress walls were undermined, and breaches were created after several days of artillery bombardment. Nobody came to the city's rescue, and so after 9 weeks of resistance, the city surrendered and allowed the Ottomans a closer look at the remaining lands of Hungary and to Central Europe beyond. If we go back to our episodes about the Crusades, you may recall a charitable hospital that was established in the Levant in order to care for sick Christian pilgrims, and such was the hospital's importance that a military order was established to protect it. This was the Order of St. John, more familiarly known as the Knights Hospitaller. The Knights Hospitaller was a highly respected military order and were frequently brought into service to assist the Crusades against Muslim aggression and this continued after the fall of the Crusader states as the order relocated to the island of Rhodes at the beginning of the 14th century and stood up against Ottoman dominance of the Mediterranean sea routes, attempting to neutralise the threat against the fortunes of Christian seafarers. The Ottomans had attempted to conquer Rhodes at the end of the 15th century, but the Knights Hospitaller had heavily fortified the island and successfully defended it. In 1522, a renewed siege of the island was conducted by Suleiman. Knights from across Western Europe came to the aid of the island, but the Ottoman numbers were so high that the defenders may have been outnumbered by about 20-1. After 6 months, the Knights realised they could not hold out, and their Grand Master Philippe Villiers de l'Isle-Adam negotiated surrender terms with Suleiman. The Knights were allowed to depart Rhodes with their arms, their religious relics, and with honours, eventually relocating on the island of Malta. The Ottomans had a strong control of the Mediterranean sea routes and had removed a threat from their vicinity. Suleiman was basking in the glory of 2 very impressive and meaningful victories and could now turn his attention back to the Hungarians. With the powerful Habsburgs beyond the Kingdom of Hungary in their heartlands in Austria and surrounding Alpine territories, it would be important for the Ottomans to have some strength of influence over the borderlands of Hungary, especially as it was comparatively weak and susceptible. The 20-year-old King Louis II was leading the Hungarian forces, but his kingdom was politically divided and militarily underprepared. In 1526, near Mohacs in southern Hungary, the Hungarians, outnumbered, launched a frontal assault in order to tip the balance in their favour, but were overwhelmed by Ottoman firepower and cavalry. King Louis fled the battlefield on his horse, but he was thrown off when his horse stumbled in a marshy stream. Weighed down by his armour, the king drowned in the stream, leaving Hungary with no monarch and no leader. The Hungarians had lost the battle in less than 2 hours, and the significance was that the Ottomans were now casting their shadow over the rest of Europe. The western north of Hungary came under Habsburg control, whereas the rest of Hungary and Transylvania came under Ottoman control. Suleiman was keen to demonstrate superiority over the Hungarian lands, something which the Habsburgs could ill afford to happen. With the Habsburgs keen to control Hungarian territory themselves, Suleiman turned his attention to the Habsburg capital city of Vienna. If Suleiman could capture the city of Vienna, it would go a long way to eliminating the Habsburg threat and could be an opening to the Ottomans dominating Central Europe. Yet again, the Ottoman army considerably outnumbered their opponents. But the long march to Vienna was arduous, especially with heavy rains creating muddy conditions that hindered siege equipment and supply lines. The Ottomans launched repeated assaults with artillery and infantry. Vienna's fortifications did a fine job of standing up to this offence. With winter approaching and sickness spreading through the ranks, Suleiman was forced to order a retreat before losing any further numbers. The siege of Vienna had been a failure, but it had also been a lesson to the Habsburgs to prepare for further aggression. Constant conflict without a final revolution between the Ottomans and the Habsburgs would have been costly to both sides, and there was no denying Ottoman dominance when it came to military capability. In 1533, the Habsburgs felt compelled to accept the Treaty of Constantinople, which allowed the Habsburgs to remain in control of their Hungarian possessions as long as they paid an annual tribute to the Ottomans and acknowledged John Zapolya as the King of Hungary and one who could be described as a puppet of the Ottomans. This temporary and uneasy peace did allow Suleiman to turn his focus east and to his Safavid Persian rivals. An Ottoman sympathizer had seized control of Baghdad from the Safavids, and he was subsequently killed, and this seemed as good a reason as any to instigate Ottoman aggression towards the city of Baghdad. With the knowledge of Suleiman's intention to attack, the Safavids withdrew from Baghdad, and so the Ottomans simply arrived at the city and felt little or no resistance. By the end of 1534, Baghdad was theirs. Despite all of this Ottoman success, it would make sense that the Christian polities of Europe would have a collective concern about Ottoman progress, and so the Ottomans would quickly understand that the Europeans would not just stand back and allow the Ottomans to pick them off one by one. The capture of Rhodes from the Knights Hospitaller had been a major concern for the European sea merchants, and the fall of Hungary was likewise a major concern for the Christian states of Europe. Despite traditional hostilities towards each other, the Italian merchant states of Venice and Genoa still had control of a number of important islands in the eastern Mediterranean that required protecting from a common enemy in the Ottomans. A North African privateer who came to be known as Hayreddin Barbarossa, someone who had terrorized Christian ships and ports during his early life, was a friend to the Ottomans, and he would be granted the rule of parts of Algeria before being summoned to the Ottoman court and given the honour of commanding the Ottoman imperial fleet. Barbarossa's naval reforms made the Ottomans a major threat to all naval presence in the Mediterranean. He was a brilliant tactician and an inspirational leader. Pope Paul III found support for the prevention of Ottoman naval dominance in the Venetians and the Holy Roman Empire under its Habsburg Emperor Charles V, and so a Holy League was formed to take on the Ottomans, and it would be led by a Genoese admiral called Andrea Doria, who was in the service of the Holy Roman Emperor. The Holy League amassed a huge naval force which would outnumber the Ottoman forces. The two naval forces met at Preveza, essentially the same stretch of water that over 1500 years earlier was the site of the Battle of Actium, the famous naval battle between Octavian against Antony and Cleopatra. When it came to the crunch, the Venetians wanted to attack the Ottoman fleet directly, but the Genoese commander Doria showed reluctance, preferring to use feinting tactics and strategies. This mistrust and disorganisation proved to be the undoing of the Holy League, who lost any chance of demonstrating their numerical superiority and were forced to retreat, allowing the Ottomans to take the path to victory. Barbarossa was too good to not take full advantage of this weakness. The Venetians were forced to negotiate a peace treaty and cede some of their Mediterranean possessions, giving the Ottomans dominance of the eastern Mediterranean. After the death of the Ottoman-supported King of Hungary, John Zápolya, in 1540, the Habsburgs and the Hungarians attempted to take advantage of the situation by besieging the key Hungarian city of Buda, with Ottoman Hungary now being ruled over by John's infant son. Suleiman moved in with forces to lift the siege and take direct control of Buda himself, moving the continental frontier further into European territory. The first 20 years of Suleiman's reign saw some incredible gains on both the Ottomans' eastern and western fronts. The fundamental divine law of Islam is Sharia, derived principally from the Quran and Islamic tradition. Sharia provided guidance on matters of religion, morality, and personal conduct. However, governing a vast empire required additional administrative and legal frameworks that extended beyond the scope of traditional religious law. To address this, the Ottomans developed Kanun, a body of secular regulations that operated alongside Sharia. Drawing upon earlier Islamic, Turkic, Byzantine and Seljuk traditions, Kanun enabled the empire to govern consistently across its diverse territories. In particular, it provided uniformity in areas such as taxation, criminal justice, and property law. The period during the middle of the 16th century represents a cultural zenith for the Ottomans under Suleiman the Magnificent. Historians generally suggest that the Ottoman Empire was never stronger than during this period. It's interesting to note how pragmatic the Ottomans were under this great line of monarchs, from Mehmed to Selim to Suleiman. This was about expansion, territory, and power, and it is not accurate to describe their ascent as a religious crusade. The Ottomans were very comfortable to enter into an alliance with the French, who were a mutual enemy of the Habsburgs and whose strength served to make the Ottomans' ambitions easier to achieve. The Ottomans had further ambitions in the Mediterranean and projected their power as far west as the coast of Spain, once again a land under the jurisdiction of the Habsburg dynasty. The Knights Hospitaller had been allowed to leave Rhodes when the Ottomans conquered the island in 1522 and had established a new base much further west on the island of Malta. By the 1560s, the age of Hayreddin Barbarossa had passed, and following his passing in 1546, new naval commanders would have to fill his shoes. With the Knights still conducting raids on Ottoman ships, Suleiman felt that eliminating the Knights would be beneficial, not only to get rid of their pestilence, but also to gain an important foothold in the centre of the Mediterranean Sea. With the Knights vastly outnumbered and the winning record and mentality of the Ottomans, a repeat of the Siege of Rhodes seemed inevitable. In 1565, the Ottomans attacked Fort St. Elmo, expecting it to fall. But the Knights had been improving the fortress, and the capture of the fort took a significant amount of the Ottomans' resources, something that they had not anticipated. The rest of the campaign was an uphill struggle, and the Ottomans were forced to withdraw, exhausted by the attritional cost to them. The Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller, Jean Parisot de Valette, was celebrated as a hero throughout Europe, and the new city of Valletta was later founded and named in his honour. The Habsburgs and the papacy celebrated this as a victory for Christianity over Islam, and gave Christian Europe a renewed belief that they could stand up to this seemingly unbeatable force inside their continent. The failure at Malta just made Suleiman more determined for success, and although he was now 72 years of age, he was determined to clear the path for the Ottomans to be able to advance from Hungary onto the Habsburg capital city of Vienna. The Ottomans were targeting the fortress at Sigetvar, and while camping outside the fortress, the Sultan passed away in his tent. The Ottoman Grand Vizier, Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, made a quick decision to bury Suleiman under his tent and conceal his death from his army, who he feared would be significantly demoralised to learn of the magnificent Sultan's death. Messages and appearances were carefully managed to maintain the illusion that the Sultan was still alive, but ultimately his body was embalmed and transported back to Constantinople. Not only did the Ottoman Empire expand militarily under Suleiman the Magnificent, but it also reached an architectural and cultural peak, epitomised by the work of Mimar Sinan, the empire's chief architect. Sinan is credited with the design or supervision of more than 300 structures across the empire. And some great examples are the Shehzade and Suleymaniye mosques in modern Istanbul, the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, and the Kanuni Sultan Suleiman Bridge in Büyükçekmece, just over 20 miles west of the centre of Istanbul. Suleiman's reign would become the benchmark by which all future Ottoman sultans would be judged. The territorial expansion, the legal and administrative codifications, the cultural and architectural highlights, and the empire's undeniable belonging in the political continent of Europe would collectively be the legacy of this glorious period in Ottoman history.
Bonjour, compadre. It's the
Priceline Negotiator.
How do I negotiate so many great travel deals? My greatest gadget, the Priceline app. It's got hotel deals, flight deals, rental car deals, all of those deals in a bundle. Deals, game day deals, concert trip deals. No one deals more deals than Priceline. Hold your horses, there's more. The app lets you filter hotels by neighborhood, vibe, star level, and amenities like pools and spas and beachfronts and... Wait, I'm not done. Stop cutting me off.
Priceline.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the History of the World podcast, our first episode of Volume 5. And welcome back. Welcome back to the podcast. It's been a number of months since our last proper episode, and it's a pleasure now to bring the podcast back to you. And thank you so much for your patience in waiting for this next episode. I cannot begin to tell you what a strange year 2026 has been, and it's now my pleasure to be able to present the first episode of Volume 5, and let's hope that the flow keeps coming. Subsequent episodes are published regularly, and you'll be pleased to know that episode 2 is already out there, so it's been published simultaneously. And also, thanks very much for voting for the name of this volume. Volume 5 has now been called The Expansionist World, and it's thanks to you guys that name has come to pass. And took quite a lot of voting. There was a lot of candidates, but we finally boiled it down to this one. So thank you very much. I think it's a very good name, and I think it's quite apt for this period. What's to come on the podcast? Well, this volume, I don't think it will be quite as long as Volume 4 was. We did have a lot of centuries to cover in Volume 4. This one, we're only covering from 1450 through to 1750, so it's a much shorter time period, but there's still an awful lot to cram in, so there's a lot to look forward to. The upcoming episodes will certainly focus on the Ottomans primarily, and there will be much about their history and this really fascinating period when the Ottomans are really trying to push into Europe against their sort of their arch enemies, the Christians of Europe. And how those different scenarios play out, the many different battles. Of course, it's not all about the West for the Ottomans. The Safavids of Persia really rise up during this period and become a real nuisance in the East. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about them as well before we go into European history and voyages of discovery, and things to do with the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. There's much going on in Europe during this period that we've got to explore. And so it's going to really be a fascinating volume. There's no two ways about that. We can't wait to get into the details. Listener messages, we're not going to have any this time, but we're saving them up. There's plenty of listener messages that need to be read out, and I look forward to getting back to those. And so over the next few episodes, we're going to try and dig deep into those messages that you've been very kind to send me. And also, I'm very humbled by the amount of messages that are asking how I am and, what's going on with the podcast. It's really quite humbling that people do care about me as an individual as well as the podcast itself. So I really do thank you, and I'm very grateful for your kind messages. Great news. We've got a sister podcast now, the History of the World podcast Timelines, and it's a slightly different. It's, still the same, still the same approach and the same desire to stick to facts and make things comprehensible and listenable. We're going to explore each of the presidents of the USA, and I was very much inspired by Lillian Cunningham's presidential podcast, which I think is absolutely wonderful. And if you've never listened to it, please go and listen to it. But if you just want to learn the facts about each of the American presidents, and I'm pleased to be able to present you with this new podcast, the History of the World podcast Timelines. And so one by one, we're going to go through the American presidents, and it's going to be very concise. So the episodes are going to be less in length than the one you're listening to now, this one, the History of the World podcast. And, give it a try, see what you think. It's going to be a lot of fun. Well, next time on the History of the World podcast, this podcast, we're going to be exploring the fascinating siege of Belgrade. Can the Ottomans really get a major foothold in Europe by capturing this key city? Well, we're going to find that out in our next episode, and great news, that episode is out right now, so don't delay, go and listen right now. You'll be able to discover a lot more about the siege of Belgrade and meet some of these fantastic European characters such as John Hunyadi. Go and listen now. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode, and until next time, be good.
Are you one of those media strategy people clicking through slides, scrolling spreadsheets? Yes? Good. This is for you. Because on Spotify, there's an audience that's different, locked in, loyal, invested. They're called fans. Fans don't just listen to music, they feel seen by it, like it belongs to them. So when your brand shows up on Spotify, that's who you're talking to. And you're right next to artists like me, Lizzo. So, are you ready to talk to fans? Spotify advertising. You're among fans.
Are you enjoying the History of the World podcast? If so, visit historyoftheworldpodcast.com, click on the Patreon link, and sign up to make a monthly contribution. Follow the History of the World podcast on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, Threads, Tumblr, and Mastodon. And don't forget to look out for our sister podcast, History of the World podcast Timelines. Thanks for listening.